In the 1930s and 40s, seniors living alone made cheap vintage one-bowl dinners that mattered. Their work wasn't just cooking. Depression-era macaroni and white bean chowder fed them for pennies using one bowl. Then convenience food arrived, and these dinners vanished. What did seniors living alone know that we lost? This one-bowl dinner fed families for pennies during the Great Depression. Seniors living alone would boil a box of elbow macaroni until tender, then drain and return it to the pot. They'd add sliced frankfurters, the cheapest protein available, a can of diced tomatoes, a drained can of kidney beans, and a can of whole kernel corn. Everything simmered together for 10 minutes, seasoned with salt, black pepper, and a pinch of sugar to cut the tomato acid. The result was a thick, hearty stew eaten straight from a bowl with a spoon. No side dishes, no salad, no dessert, just this filling bowl that cost under 50 cents and lasted 2 meals. Today it's forgotten, replaced by instant ramen and frozen dinners, but back then this macaroni and frank stew kept seniors alive through hard winters when money and food were scarce. A true poverty meal made in one cast-iron skillet and eaten from one bowl. Seniors would peel 3 or 4 russet potatoes, dice them into small cubes, and fry them in 2 tablespoons of bacon fat or lard over medium-high heat. Once the potatoes started to brown, they'd add thick-sliced smoked sausage, or any cheap sausage available, and 1 chopped yellow onion. Everything fried together for 20 minutes, stirred occasionally, until the potatoes were crispy on the outside and tender inside, and the sausage was caramelized. Seasoned with just salt and pepper, this hash was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork. No plate, no garnish, no fuss. It cost less than $1 and provided protein, carbs, and enough calories to fuel a senior through a long day of chores or work. Yet today, nobody makes it anymore. One of the most iconic Depression-era one-bowl dinners, this white bean chowder, required patience, but almost no money. Seniors would soak 1 pound of dried Great Northern beans overnight in cold water, then drain and rinse them the next morning. The beans went into a large pot with a leftover ham bone, saved from Sunday dinner, 6 cups of water, 2 diced carrots, 2 chopped celery stalks, 1 diced turnip, and a bay leaf. Everything simmered on low heat for 3 to 4 hours until the beans burst open and thickened the broth naturally, and the ham bone released every bit of flavor. The bone was removed, any meat picked off and stirred back in, and the chowder was ladled into a bowl, eaten with a piece of day-old bread. This meal cost pennies and provided enough leftovers for 2 or 3 days. All right, number 4 is where things get really interesting. But before we go there, before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. This golden thick soup was a Depression and wartime staple for seniors living alone. 1 cup of dried yellow split peas was rinsed and added to a pot with 4 cups of water, leftover ham scraps or a ham hock, 1 diced yellow onion, and 1 bay leaf. The pot simmered on low heat for 2 to 3 hours, unstirred occasionally until the split peas broke down completely into a thick porridge-like consistency. The ham bone or scraps were removed, any meat shredded and returned, and the soup seasoned with salt and pepper. Seniors would ladle this hearty potage into a bowl and eat it with a spoon, sometimes with a piece of cornbread on the side. It was filling, nutritious, cheap, and simple, costing less than 30 cents. But it's now completely forgotten and replaced by canned split pea soup that tastes nothing like the original. A delicate, elegant one-bowl dinner that cost almost nothing and took less than 10 minutes to make. Seniors would heat 4 cups of homemade chicken broth, or water with a chicken bouillon cube, in a pot until boiling, then stir in 1 tablespoon of cornstarch mixed with 2 tablespoons of cold water to thicken it slightly. While stirring the broth in a circular motion to create a whirlpool, they'd slowly drizzle in 2 beaten raw eggs, which cooked instantly into delicate, silky ribbons. The soup was seasoned with a pinch of salt and white pepper, then ladled into a bowl and topped with thin-sliced green onions. This egg drop soup was light yet satisfying, perfect for seniors with small appetites, and it used only pantry staples. Today it's ordered from Chinese restaurants, but the homemade version, simple, cheap, and comforting, has vanished from home kitchens completely. These 5 Depression-era one-bowl dinners, macaroni and frank stew, skillet potato and sausage hash, white bean chowder, yellow split pea pottage, and Chinese egg flour soup, once sustained seniors living alone through the hardest economic times in American history. They were cheap, simple, and filling, made from pantry staples and eaten straight from a single bowl with no table setting or fuss. Today, they've been replaced by frozen meals, instant soups, and takeout. This thick, velvety potato soup was a Depression-era comfort meal for seniors living alone. 4 large russet potatoes were peeled, diced into half-inch cubes, and boiled in salted water until fork tender. Instead of draining all the water, seniors would remove about half, then use a potato masher to crush some of the potato cubes against the side of the pot, creating a naturally thick, creamy base. They'd stir in 1 cup of whole milk, 2 tablespoons of butter, and 1 finely diced onion that had been softened in a separate pan. The chowder was seasoned with salt, white pepper, and sometimes a pinch of paprika, then ladled into a bowl and eaten with a spoon. It cost less than 25 cents, provided carbs and calcium, and tasted rich and satisfying despite its simplicity, yet today it's been replaced by canned creamy soups. A tangy, unique one-bowl dinner that stretched a head of cabbage into multiple meals. Seniors would core and shred half a head of green cabbage into thin strips, then add it to a pot with 1 can of crushed tomatoes, 1 chopped onion, 3 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and a pinch of salt. Everything simmered together for 30 to 40 minutes until the cabbage was tender and the broth turned sweet-sour and flavorful. The soup was ladled into a bowl and eaten with a slice of rye bread or a piece of cornbread. The vinegar and sugar balanced each other perfectly, creating a bright, tangy flavor that was unlike any other soup. It cost pennies per serving and used ingredients every senior had on hand. But today, this sweet and sour cabbage soup has vanished completely from American kitchens. This rustic, earthy soup was a protein-packed one-bowl meal for Depression-era seniors. 1 cup of dried brown lentils was rinsed and added to a pot with 6 cups of water, 1 finely diced carrot, 1 diced onion, 1 chopped celery stalk, a bay leaf, and a sprig of fresh thyme if available. The pot simmered on low heat for 1 to 2 hours, stirred occasionally until the lentils broke down and thickened the soup into a hearty porridge-like consistency. Seniors would remove the bay leaf and thyme sprig, then season the pottage with salt and black pepper. Ladled into a bowl and eaten with a spoon, this lentil soup provided plant-based protein, fiber, and iron for less than 30 cents. It was filling, nutritious, and deeply satisfying, yet today it's been forgotten in favor of canned lentil soups that lack the depth and texture of the original. Nothing went to waste during the Depression, and a leftover ham bone became the foundation for this rich, hearty stew. After Sunday dinner, seniors would save the ham bone with bits of meat still clinging to it, then add it to a pot with 1 pound of soaked dried navy beans, 6 cups of water, 1 chopped onion, and a generous amount of cracked black pepper. The pot simmered on low heat for 4 to 5 hours, with water added as needed, until the beans turned buttery soft and the ham bone released all its flavor and collagen into the broth. The bone was removed, any remaining meat picked off and stirred back in, and the stew was ladled into a bowl. Eaten with cornbread, this ham bone and bean stew cost almost nothing and provided multiple meals. But today, most people throw away ham bones without a second thought. A simple, colorful one-bowl meal that turned plain white rice into a flavorful dinner. Seniors would add 1 cup of long-grain white rice to a pot with 1 can of stewed tomatoes, crushed by hand, 1 cup of tomato juice or water, 1 finely diced onion, a pinch of paprika, salt, and pepper. Everything was stirred together, brought to a boil, then covered and simmered on low heat for 20 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned fluffy and bright red. The Spanish tomato rice was fluffed with a fork, scooped into a bowl, and eaten with a spoon. Sometimes seniors would top it with a fried egg or a sprinkle of grated cheese if they had it. This dish cost less than 50 cents and provided carbs, vitamins, and flavor. But today it's been forgotten in favor of boxed Spanish rice mixes. These 10 one-bowl dinners, macaroni stew, potato hash, white bean chowder, split pea pottage, egg flour soup, potato chowder, cabbage soup, lentil pottage, ham bone stew, and Spanish tomato rice, once sustained Depression-era seniors living alone. Today, they've been replaced by frozen meals and canned soups, and the simple skills to make them from scratch have completely vanished. This was the ultimate use what you have, one-bowl dinner during the Depression. Seniors living alone would gather any meat scraps available, bacon ends, beef trimmings, leftover pork bits, sausage ends, and brown them in a heavy pot with a bit of fat. Then they'd add whatever vegetables were on hand, diced potatoes, sliced carrots, chopped onions, celery ends, even turnip or cabbage scraps. Everything was covered with water, seasoned with salt and pepper, and simmered for 2 to 3 hours until the meat fell apart and the vegetables melted into a thick, rich stew. The longer it cooked, the better it tasted. Seniors would ladle this hobo stew into a bowl and eat it with a chunk of day-old bread for soaking up the broth. No 2 batches ever tasted the same because it depended entirely on what scraps were available, but it always cost almost nothing and filled empty stomachs. Today, this improvisational cooking style has been lost to meal plans and precise recipes. This Depression-era one-skillet meal was a lifesaver for seniors on tight budgets. 1 pound of ground beef, the cheapest cut available, was browned in a cast-iron skillet, fat drained off and saved for later use. The beef stayed in the pan while 2 cups of cooked elbow macaroni, 1 can of tomato sauce, 1 diced green bell pepper, and 1 chopped onion were stirred in. Everything cooked together for 10 minutes over medium heat until the sauce thickened and the flavors melded. Seasoned with salt, black pepper, and a pinch of sugar, the slumgullion was scooped straight from the skillet into a bowl and eaten with a spoon. It provided protein, carbs, and vegetables in one dish for under $1, and leftovers kept for days. The name slumgullion came from mining camps where cheap stews were standard fare, but today this practical on a filling meal has been replaced by hamburger helper and boxed pasta dinners that cost more and taste worse. Named for its rock-bottom cost, this simple bean soup sustained seniors through the worst of the Depression. 1 cup of any dried beans, navy, pinto, kidney, or a mix of whatever was in the pantry, was soaked overnight, drained, and added to a pot with 6 cups of water, 1 chopped onion, and 2 tablespoons of bacon grease or lard for flavor. The pot simmered on low heat for 3 to 4 hours, with water added as needed, until the beans were tender and the broth thickened naturally. Seniors would season it with salt and pepper, then ladle it into a bowl and eat it with cornbread or a piece of toast. Sometimes they'd add a ham bone or bacon scraps if available, but most of the time it was just beans, onion, and fat. This soup cost less than 10 cents per serving and provided protein and fiber. Yet today, dried beans sit unused in pantries while people buy expensive canned soups. A simple, filling one-bowl meal that combined 2 of the cheapest ingredients available. Half a head of green cabbage was cored and shredded into thin strips, then fried in a large skillet with 3 tablespoons of butter or bacon fat over medium-high heat. The cabbage was stirred frequently and cooked for 15 to 20 minutes until it caramelized and turned golden brown at the edges, becoming sweet and tender. Meanwhile, 8 ounces of egg noodles were boiled in salted water until tender, then drained. The hot noodles were added directly to the skillet with the fried cabbage, tossed together with salt and black pepper, and scooped into a bowl. Some seniors added a dollop of sour cream or a sprinkle of caraway seeds if they had them. This dish cost less than 30 cents and provided carbs and vitamins, but today, it's been forgotten in favor of pasta with jarred sauces that cost 10 times as much. During World War II rationing, this one-bowl meal stretched expensive beef into multiple servings. Seniors would buy a small jar of dried chipped beef, thin slices of salted dried beef, tear it into small pieces, and rinse it under cold water to remove excess salt. In a saucepan, they'd make a simple white sauce by melting 2 tablespoons of butter, whisking in 2 tablespoons of flour to make a roux, then slowly adding 1½ cups of milk, while stirring constantly until thick and creamy. The rinsed beef pieces were stirred into the white sauce and heated through. 2 slices of bread were toasted, torn into bite-sized pieces, and placed in a bowl. The hot creamed beef was ladled over the toast bits and eaten immediately with a spoon while the toast was still slightly crispy. This meal cost under 50 cents and provided protein and calcium, but today it's been replaced by frozen creamed dishes that lack the homemade richness. Before oxtails became an expensive restaurant delicacy, they were the cheapest cut of meat available, and seniors living alone turned them into rich, nourishing soup. 2 to 3 pounds of oxtails were browned in a heavy pot with a bit of fat, then covered with 8 cups of water and brought to a boil. The heat was reduced to a low simmer, and the oxtails cooked for 4 to 5 hours until the meat fell off the bones and the broth turned thick and gelatinous from the collagen. Seniors would add diced turnips, carrots, and celery in the last hour of cooking, along with a handful of barley or rice to stretch the meal. The bones were removed, any meat picked off and returned to the pot, and the soup was ladled into a bowl. This oxtail soup cost pennies and provided deep, beefy flavor and nutrients. But today, oxtails are too expensive for everyday cooking, and this once common soup has disappeared. This hearty one-bowl meal transformed tough, cheap cuts of beef into tender, flavorful stew. Seniors would buy beef chuck or stew meat on sale, cut it into 1-inch cubes, and brown it in a heavy pot with a tablespoon of lard or bacon fat. Once browned, they'd sprinkle 2 tablespoons of flour over the meat, stir to coat, then slowly add 4 cups of water or beef broth while stirring to create a thick brown gravy. Diced potatoes, sliced carrots, and chopped onions were added, along with salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The pot simmered on low heat for 2 to 3 hours until the beef was fork tender and the vegetables were soft. Ladled into a bowl and eaten with a spoon, this brown gravy beef stew was the ultimate comfort food for seniors living alone, costing under $2 and providing leftovers for days. Today it's been replaced by canned beef stew that lacks the rich, homemade flavor. The ultimate healing one-bowl meal, this homemade chicken noodle soup was made completely from scratch. Seniors would simmer a whole chicken carcass, or just the backs, necks, and wings, the cheapest parts, in a large pot with 8 cups of water, 1 quartered onion, 2 celery stalks, 2 carrots, a handful of parsley, and a bay leaf for 3 to 4 hours. The broth was strained, on the chicken bones picked clean of any meat, and the meat shredded and returned to the pot. Fresh egg noodles were made by mixing 2 cups of flour with 3 eggs and a pinch of salt, rolling the dough thin, cutting it into strips, and letting it dry for 30 minutes. The noodles were added to the boiling broth, along with diced carrots and celery, and cooked for 15 minutes. Ladled into a bowl, this chicken noodle soup was pure comfort and healing, costing under $1. And today, people buy canned versions that taste nothing like this homemade original. During the Depression and World War II, seniors living alone grew their own vegetables and turned them into this simple, nutritious soup. Whatever vegetables were ready in the garden, tomatoes, green beans, corn, zucchini, carrots, potatoes, onions, were chopped and added to a large pot with 6 cups of water or homemade broth. Everything simmered together for 1 hour until the vegetables were tender, seasoned with salt, pepper, and a pinch of dried basil or oregano if available. Some seniors would add a can of tomato juice or paste to give the broth more body and flavor. This garden vegetable soup was ladled into a bowl and eaten with a piece of homemade bread for dunking. It cost almost nothing if you grew your own vegetables, and it provided vitamins and fiber in every spoonful. Today, most people buy expensive organic vegetable soups at the store instead of making this simple, fresh version at home. This quick, colorful one-bowl breakfast for dinner was a Depression staple for seniors living alone. 2 russet potatoes were peeled, diced small, and fried in a cast-iron skillet with 2 tablespoons of bacon fat or lard until golden and crispy. 1 diced green bell pepper and 1 chopped onion were added and cooked until soft, about 5 minutes. 4 eggs were beaten with a splash of milk, salt, and black pepper, then poured over the potatoes and vegetables. The mixture was scrambled together over medium heat, stirred constantly until the eggs were just set and fluffy. The Spanish scramble was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork, sometimes topped with a spoonful of salsa or hot sauce if available. This meal provided protein, carbs, and vegetables for under 50 cents and could be made in under 20 minutes. But today it's been replaced by expensive breakfast bowls at restaurants that cost 10 times as much for the same ingredients. These 21-bowl dinners, from hobo stew to Spanish scramble, were survival meals that kept seniors fed through the Depression and World War II on pennies per serving. They used scraps, pantry staples, and whatever was cheapest. Today, these resourceful, filling dishes have been forgotten and replaced by expensive takeout and processed foods that cost more and nourish less. This simple, nourishing one-bowl dinner was a weekly staple for seniors living alone during the post-war years. The meal started by browning 2 or 3 chicken thighs, bone in, skin on for flavor and fat, in a heavy pot with a tablespoon of lard or butter. Once the chicken skin turned golden and crispy, it was removed and set aside. In the same pot, 1 diced onion was sautéed in the chicken drippings until soft and translucent, about 5 minutes. Then 1 cup of long-grain white rice was added and stirred to coat with the fat. The browned chicken thighs were returned to the pot along with 2½ cups of water or homemade chicken broth, 1 diced carrot, 1 diced celery stalk, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The pot was covered tightly and simmered on low heat for 30 to 40 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned fluffy, and the chicken was cooked through. The bay leaf was removed, and the entire meal, chicken, rice, and vegetables, was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a spoon and fork. The chicken skin was crispy, the rice was flavorful from cooking in the chicken fat, and the vegetables added color and nutrition. This one-pot chicken and rice cost under $2 and provided protein, carbs, and vitamins in a single comforting bowl. Today, it's been replaced by rotisserie chicken and instant rice, and the patience to cook everything together in one pot has disappeared from modern kitchens. This rich, comforting one-bowl meal transformed tough, cheap beef into tender, buttery perfection. Seniors living alone would buy a 1-pound piece of beef chuck roast, the cheapest cut available, cut it into 2-inch chunks, and season it generously with salt and black pepper. The beef was browned in a heavy pot with a tablespoon of lard, then covered with 4 cups of water or beef broth. 1 quartered onion, 1 bay leaf, and a few peppercorns were added, and the pot simmered on the lowest heat for 3 to 4 hours until the beef was fork-tender and falling apart. Meanwhile, 8 ounces of wide egg noodles were boiled in salted water until tender, then drained. The cooked noodles were added directly to the pot with the beef and broth, along with 3 tablespoons of butter, and everything was stirred together gently. The buttered beef and noodles were ladled into a bowl, with the rich broth soaking into the noodles and the butter creating a silky coating. Some seniors would sprinkle chopped fresh parsley on top if they had it growing in the garden. This meal cost under $2 and provided multiple servings of protein and carbs. The slow-cooked beef was so tender it melted in your mouth, and the buttered noodles were pure comfort. Today, this dish has been forgotten, replaced by expensive beef stroganoff and boxed noodle mixes that lack the depth of flavor from hours of slow simmering. During the summer months, when corn was abundant and cheap, seniors living alone made this sweet, creamy chowder that tasted like sunshine in a bowl. The process started by frying 3 strips of bacon in a heavy pot until crispy, then removing the bacon and setting it aside. In the bacon fat, 1 diced onion was sautéed until soft and golden, about 5 minutes. 3 large russet potatoes were peeled, diced into 1/2-inch cubes, and added to the pot along with 3 cups of water and a generous pinch of salt. The potatoes simmered for 15 minutes until tender. Meanwhile, 4 ears of fresh corn were shucked, and the kernels cut off the cobs using a sharp knife. The corn kernels were added to the pot, along with 1½ cups of whole milk and 1 tablespoon of butter. Everything simmered together for 10 more minutes, allowing the corn's natural sweetness to infuse the broth. The chowder was ladled into a bowl and topped with the crumbled crispy bacon. The combination of sweet corn, creamy potatoes, smoky bacon, and rich milk created a chowder that was both light and satisfying. This meal cost under $1 during corn season and provided carbs, protein, and vitamins. Today, people buy expensive canned corn chowder that tastes nothing like this fresh, homemade version made from garden-fresh corn and simple ingredients that seniors grew and prepared themselves. This one-bowl dinner brought the flavors of New Orleans to seniors' tables for pennies. 1 pound of dried red kidney beans was soaked overnight in cold water, then drained and rinsed the next morning. The beans went into a heavy pot with 6 cups of fresh water, 1 leftover ham hock or ham bone, saved from Sunday dinner, 1 diced onion, 1 diced green bell pepper, 3 minced garlic cloves, 2 bay leaves, and a generous amount of black pepper and cayenne pepper. The pot simmered on low heat for 3 to 4 hours, stirred occasionally till the beans turned creamy and the liquid thickened into a rich, flavorful gravy. Some of the beans were mashed against the side of the pot to make the mixture even creamier. The ham bone was removed, any meat picked off and stirred back in, and the red beans were ladled over a mound of plain white rice in a bowl. The combination was eaten with a spoon, and the rice soaked up the spicy, savory bean gravy perfectly. Some seniors would add a dash of hot sauce or a spoonful of chopped green onions on top. This meal cost less than $1 and provided protein, fiber, and bold flavor. It was traditionally made on Mondays using Sunday's leftover ham bone, and it kept in the icebox for days. Today, people buy canned red beans that lack the depth, creaminess, and authentic flavor of this slow-cooked Louisiana classic. This simple, a filling one-bowl meal combined 2 Depression staples, pinto beans and cornbread, into one satisfying dish. Seniors would cook 1 pound of dried pinto beans that had been soaked overnight, simmering them in 6 cups of water with 1 diced onion, 2 tablespoons of bacon grease or lard, and a generous amount of salt and cumin for 3 to 4 hours until the beans were soft and creamy. While the beans cooked, a simple cornbread was made by mixing 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of flour, and 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, a pinch of salt, 1 egg, 1 cup of milk, and 2 tablespoons of melted lard. The batter was poured into a greased cast-iron skillet and baked at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes until golden brown. Once the cornbread cooled slightly, it was crumbled into large chunks. To assemble the Mexican pinto bowl, seniors would ladle a generous portion of the hot pinto beans with their cooking liquid into a bowl. I then crumble chunks of warm cornbread directly on top. The cornbread soaked up the bean broth and turned soft and flavorful, while the beans provided protein and fiber. Sometimes a spoonful of chopped raw onion or a sprinkle of shredded cheese was added on top if available. This meal cost less than 50 cents and was incredibly filling, providing enough energy to fuel a senior through an entire day of work or chores. These 5 post-war one-bowl dinners, 1 pot chicken and rice, a buttered beef and noodles, corn and potato chowder, Louisiana red beans, and Mexican pinto bowl fed seniors through the 1940s and 50s on less than $2 each. They used simple ingredients and 1 pot. Today, they've been replaced by expensive takeout and frozen meals that cost more and nourish less. This one-bowl meal turned plain rice into a complete flavorful dinner using ground beef and tomatoes. Today, seniors living alone would brown 1/2 pound of ground beef in a large skillet, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon until fully cooked, then drain off most of the fat, saving a tablespoon in the pan. 1 diced onion and 1 diced green bell pepper were added to the beef and cooked until soft, about 5 minutes. Then 1 cup of long-grain white rice was stirred in and toasted for 2 minutes until it smelled nutty. 1 can of crushed tomatoes, 1 1/2 cups of water, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1/2 a teaspoon of cumin, salt, and black pepper were added and stirred together. The skillet was covered and simmered on low heat for 25 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned tender and fluffy. The Spanish rice was fluffed with a fork, scooped into a bowl, and eaten with a spoon. Sometimes seniors would top it with a dollop of sour cream or a sprinkle of shredded cheddar cheese if they had it. This meal cost under $1.50 and provided protein, carbs, and vegetables in one dish. The flavors were bold and satisfying, slightly spicy, slightly sweet from the tomatoes, and hearty from the beef. Today, people buy boxed Spanish rice mixes that are loaded with sodium and lack the fresh homemade flavor of this simple skillet version that seniors made from scratch every week. This one-bowl comfort meal stretched a single chicken into multiple servings using fluffy dumplings. Seniors would simmer a whole chicken, or just the backs, necks, and wings, the cheapest parts, in 8 cups of water with 1 quartered onion, 2 celery stalks, 2 carrots, a handful of parsley, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf for 2 to 3 hours until the meat fell off the bones. The broth was strained, the chicken bones picked clean, and the meat shredded and returned to the pot along with the strained vegetables. The broth was brought back to a gentle boil. For the dumplings, seniors would mix 1½ cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 3 tablespoons of softened butter, and 3/4 cup of milk into a thick, sticky batter. Using 2 spoons, they'd drop spoonfuls of the batter directly onto the surface of the simmering broth, making sure not to overcrowd the pot. The pot was covered tightly, and the dumplings steamed for 15 minutes without lifting the lid. This was crucial for fluffy dumplings. When the lid was finally removed, the dumplings had puffed up to twice their size and were light and fluffy on the inside. The chicken, vegetables, broth, and dumplings were ladled together into a bowl and eaten with a spoon. This meal cost under $2 and provided multiple servings of protein and carbs. Today, people buy canned chicken and dumplings that taste nothing like this homemade version with its rich broth and tender, fluffy dumplings. This hearty one-bowl meal combined cheap beef with winter root vegetables that stored well and cost almost nothing. Seniors living alone would cut 1 pound of beef chuck into 1-inch cubes, season with salt and pepper, and brown in a heavy pot with a tablespoon of lard or butter. Once browned, then the beef was set aside and 1 diced onion was sautéed in the same pot until golden. 2 tablespoons of flour were sprinkled over the onions and stirred to make a roux. Then 4 cups of beef broth or water were slowly added while stirring to create a thick brown gravy. The browned beef was returned to the pot along with 2 diced potatoes, 2 sliced carrots, 1 diced turnip, 1 diced parsnip, 2 bay leaves, and a sprig of fresh thyme if available. Everything simmered on low heat for 2 to 3 hours until the beef was fork tender and the root vegetables were soft and infused with the beefy gravy. The hot pot was ladled into a bowl and eaten with a spoon, and sometimes a piece of crusty bread was used to soak up the rich gravy. The root vegetables added natural sweetness and earthiness that balanced the savory beef perfectly. This meal cost under $2 and provided protein, carbs, and vitamins, and it kept in the icebox for several days. Today, root vegetables like turnips and parsnips are rarely used, and this once common hot pot has been forgotten in favor of expensive beef stews made with pre-cut vegetables. This practical one-bowl meal turned leftovers into a hearty, satisfying dinner. Seniors would save any leftover cooked meat from Sunday dinner, roast beef, pork chop, chicken, ham, and dice it into small cubes. 3 or 4 russet potatoes were peeled, diced into half-inch cubes, and boiled in salted water for 5 minutes to partially cook them, then drained. In a large cast-iron skillet, 2 tablespoons of bacon fat or butter were heated over medium-high heat, and the parboiled potatoes were added and fried, stirring occasionally until they turned golden and crispy on all sides, about 15 minutes. 1 diced onion was added and cooked until soft and caramelized, about 5 more minutes. Then the diced leftover meat was stirred in and heated through. Everything was seasoned generously with salt, black pepper, and sometimes a pinch of paprika or a dash of Worcestershire sauce for extra flavor. The hash was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork, sometimes topped with a fried egg or a dollop of ketchup. This meal cost almost nothing because it used leftovers that would otherwise be thrown away, and it provided protein and carbs in a filling, flavorful bowl. The crispy potatoes, decaramelized onions, and savory meat created a perfect combination of textures and flavors. Today, people throw away leftovers and buy expensive hash at diners instead of making this simple, resourceful dish at home the way seniors did every week. This creamy, rich one-bowl meal was made completely from scratch on the stovetop, with no baking required. Seniors living alone would boil 8 ounces of elbow macaroni in salted water until just tender, then drain it and return it to the pot while it was still hot. Immediately, 3 tablespoons of butter and 1½ cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese were added to the hot macaroni and stirred vigorously until the butter melted and the cheese melted into a creamy sauce that coated every noodle. Then ½ a cup of whole milk was stirred in to loosen the sauce and make it even creamier. The mac and cheese was seasoned with a pinch of salt, black pepper, and sometimes a tiny pinch of dry mustard powder to enhance the cheese flavor. The entire pot of creamy, cheesy macaroni was scooped into a bowl and eaten immediately while it was hot and the cheese was still gooey. Some seniors would sprinkle a bit of paprika on top for color. This stovetop mac and cheese cost under 75 cents and took less than 15 minutes to make. Yet it was incredibly satisfying and comforting. The cheese sauce was smooth and real, and made from actual cheese instead of powder, and the flavor was rich and sharp. Today, people buy boxed mac and cheese with powdered cheese sauce that costs more and tastes artificial compared to this simple homemade version that seniors made from scratch every week without a second thought. These 5 one-bowl dinners, ground beef, Spanish rice, chicken and dumplings, root vegetable hot pot, potato hash, Jew and stovetop mac and cheese, fed seniors through the 1940s and 50s on under $2 each. They used leftovers, pantry staples, and simple techniques. Today, they've been replaced by expensive boxed mixes and frozen meals that lack homemade flavor. This simple, hearty one-bowl meal combined 2 of the cheapest ingredients available into a satisfying dinner. Seniors living alone would slice 1 pound of fresh pork sausage, bulk sausage, or links cut into thick rounds, and brown it in a large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat until the fat rendered out and the sausage turned golden brown and crispy on the edges, about 10 minutes. The cooked sausage was removed and set aside, and most of the fat was poured off, leaving about 2 tablespoons in the pan. 1 small head of green cabbage was cored and sliced into thin ribbons, and 1 diced onion was added to the hot skillet. The cabbage and onion were stirred and cooked in the sausage fat for 15 to 20 minutes, stirring occasionally until the cabbage wilted down and started to caramelize and turn golden brown at the edges. The browned sausage was returned to the skillet along with a 1/4 cup of water, salt, black pepper, and sometimes a pinch of caraway seeds or a splash of vinegar for extra flavor. Everything was stirred together, covered, and simmered for 5 more minutes until the cabbage was completely tender and the flavors melded. The skillet sausage and cabbage was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork. The cabbage was sweet and tender, the sausage was savory and rich, and the combination was incredibly satisfying. This meal cost under $1.50 and provided protein, vegetables, and plenty of calories to fuel a senior through a long day. This one-pot rice dish brought the bold flavors of Louisiana to seniors' tables for under $2. The process started by browning ½ a pound of sliced smoked sausage, andouille if available, kielbasa if not, in a heavy pot with a tablespoon of oil. Once browned, the sausage was removed and set aside. In the same pot, 2 diced chicken thighs were browned until golden, then removed and set aside with the sausage. 1 diced onion, 1 diced green bell pepper, 2 diced celery stalks, and 3 minced garlic cloves were sautéed in the same pot until soft and fragrant, about 5 minutes. 1½ cups of long-grain white rice was stirred in and toasted for 2 minutes. Then 1 can of diced tomatoes with their juice, 2½ cups of chicken broth, the browned sausage and chicken, 1 bay leaf, 1 teaspoon of paprika, half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, half a teaspoon of dried thyme, salt, and black pepper were all added and stirred together. The pot was covered and simmered on low heat for 30 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned tender and the chicken was cooked through. The bay leaf was removed and the jambalaya was fluffed with a fork, scooped into a bowl, and topped with sliced green onions. The rice was flavorful and slightly spicy. The chicken was tender, and the sausage added smoky richness. This meal provided protein, carbs, and vegetables in one bowl and kept for several days. This thrifty one-bowl meal turned leftover rice into a complete dinner in under 15 minutes. Seniors living alone would save leftover cooked white rice from the previous night's dinner and refrigerate it. Cold, day-old rice worked best because the grains were firm and separated easily. 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil or lard were heated in a large skillet or wok over high heat until smoking hot. Or 1 diced onion and 1 diced carrot were quickly stir-fried for 2 minutes until slightly softened. Then 3 cups of cold leftover rice were added and stir-fried, breaking up any clumps with a spatula, for 3 to 4 minutes until the rice grains were hot and starting to crisp slightly. The rice was pushed to one side of the skillet, and 2 beaten eggs were poured into the empty space and scrambled quickly, then mixed into the rice. A handful of frozen peas, or fresh if available, was stirred in along with 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 teaspoon of sesame oil if available, and black pepper to taste. Everything was stir-fried together for 1 more minute, then scooped into a bowl and topped with sliced green onions. This fried rice was savory, slightly smoky, and incredibly satisfying. It cost less than 50 cents because it used leftovers and pantry staples, and it provided protein and carbs in one bowl. Today, people order expensive fried rice from Chinese restaurants instead of making this simple version at home, the way seniors did whenever they had leftover rice. This classic one-bowl meal brought Italian-American flavors to seniors' tables for under $2. The process started by browning half a pound of ground beef in a large pot, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon until fully cooked, then draining off most of the fat. A 1 diced onion and 3 minced garlic cloves were sautéed in the same pot until soft and fragrant, about 5 minutes. Then 1 large can of crushed tomatoes, 1 small can of tomato paste, 1 cup of water, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, half a teaspoon of sugar to balance the acidity, salt and black pepper were all added and stirred together. The pot simmered on low heat for 1 hour, stirred occasionally, allowing the flavors to meld and the sauce to thicken into a rich, meaty gravy. Meanwhile, 8 ounces of dried spaghetti were boiled in salted water until al dente, then drained. The hot spaghetti was added directly to the pot with the meat sauce and tossed together until every strand was coated. The spaghetti with meat gravy was twirled onto a fork, scooped into a bowl, and eaten immediately. Sometimes seniors would grate a bit of Parmesan cheese on top if they had it. The sauce was rich and savory, the pasta was tender, and the combination was pure comfort. Today, people buy jarred spaghetti sauce that costs more and tastes bland compared to this slow-simmered homemade version that seniors made from scratch every week. This nutrient-dense one-bowl meal was a weekly staple for depression and post-war seniors because liver was the cheapest source of iron and protein available. 1 pound of beef liver was sliced into thin pieces, about half an inch thick, soaked in milk for 30 minutes to remove any bitterness, then drained and patted dry. Each piece was seasoned with salt and black pepper, then dredged in flour. 2 tablespoons of bacon fat or butter were heated in a cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat, and the floured liver slices were fried for 3 to 4 minutes per side until browned on the outside but still slightly pink on the inside. Overcooking made liver tough and bitter. The cooked liver was removed and set aside. In the same skillet, 2 large onions were sliced thin and cooked in the liver drippings for 10 to 15 minutes until deeply caramelized and golden brown. 1 tablespoon of flour was sprinkled over the onions, stirred to coat, and then 1 cup of beef broth or water was slowly added while stirring to create a rich, thick onion gravy. The liver slices were returned to the skillet and simmered in the gravy for 2 minutes to heat through. The liver and onion gravy was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork, usually served over boiled potatoes or with a piece of bread for soaking up the gravy. This meal cost under $1 and provided iron, protein, and vitamins, though today liver is rarely eaten because younger generations never learned how to cook it properly. These 5 one-bowl dinners, sausage and cabbage, Creole jambalaya, fried rice with egg, spaghetti with meat gravy, and liver with onion gravy, fed seniors through the 1940s and 50s on under $2 each. They combined simple ingredients into satisfying meals. Today, they've been replaced by expensive takeout and frozen dinners that cost more and taste worse. This delicate, comforting one-bowl meal was a springtime favorite when fresh peas and baby potatoes were in season. Seniors living alone would scrub 1 pound of small new potatoes, about the size of golf balls, leaving the thin skins on, and boil them in salted water for 15 to 20 minutes until fork tender. While the potatoes cooked, a simple white sauce was made by melting 3 tablespoons of butter in a saucepan. I'm whisking in 3 tablespoons of flour to make a roux, then slowly adding 2 cups of whole milk while whisking constantly to prevent lumps. The sauce simmered and thickened for 5 minutes, then was seasoned with salt, white pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg. 2 cups of fresh-shelled peas, or frozen peas if fresh weren't available, were added to the white sauce and simmered for 5 minutes until tender and bright green. The cooked new potatoes were drained and quartered, and then added to the creamed peas and gently stirred to coat everything in the creamy sauce. The creamed peas and potatoes were ladled into a bowl and eaten with a spoon. The baby potatoes were buttery and tender, the peas were sweet and fresh, and the white sauce was smooth and velvety. This meal cost under $1 during pea season and provided carbs, protein from the milk, and vitamins. Today, people buy frozen creamed vegetables that taste nothing like this fresh. A homemade version made from scratch when peas and new potatoes were abundant and cheap in late spring and early summer. This budget-friendly one-bowl meal became a staple during the 1950s when canned tuna was cheap and widely available. Seniors living alone would boil 8 ounces of egg noodles in salted water until tender, then drain and return them to the pot. 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, undiluted, 1 drained can of tuna, packed in water, or 1 cup of frozen peas, half a cup of milk, salt, and black pepper were added to the hot noodles and stirred together over low heat for 5 minutes until everything was heated through and combined into a creamy mixture. The tuna noodle mixture was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork. Sometimes seniors would top it with crushed potato chips or saltine crackers for added crunch, or sprinkle shredded cheddar cheese on top if they had it. The noodles were creamy and comforting. The tuna added protein, the peas added color and sweetness, and the mushroom soup created a rich, savory sauce. This meal cost under $1 and took less than 20 minutes to make, providing protein, carbs, and vegetables in one bowl. It kept well in the icebox for several days and could be reheated easily. Today, people still make tuna casserole, but they bake it in the oven with breadcrumb topping instead of eating it simply from a bowl, the way seniors did. The original stovetop version was faster, easier, and just as satisfying, but that simple preparation has been forgotten in favor of more elaborate baked casseroles. This rustic, flavorful one-bowl meal brought Italian hunter-style cooking to American seniors' tables. 2 or 3 chicken thighs, bone-in, skin-on, were seasoned with salt and black pepper, then browned in a large skillet with 2 tablespoons of olive oil until the skin was golden and crispy, on about 5 minutes per side. The chicken was removed and set aside. In the same skillet, 1 diced onion, 1 diced green bell pepper, and 4 ounces of sliced mushrooms were sautéed until soft and golden, about 7 minutes. 3 minced garlic cloves were added and cooked until fragrant, about 1 minute. Then 1 can of diced tomatoes with their juice, half a cup of red wine, or substitute with beef broth, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1 teaspoon of dried basil, salt, and black pepper were added and stirred together. The browned chicken thighs were returned to the skillet, nestled into the sauce, and the pan was covered and simmered on low heat for 35 to 40 minutes until the chicken was cooked through and tender. Meanwhile, 1 cup of white rice was cooked in 2 cups of water until fluffy. The rice was scooped into a bowl, and the hunter's chicken with its rich tomato wine sauce and vegetables was ladled on top. The chicken was fall-off-the-bone tender, the sauce was savory and slightly tangy, and the rice soaked up all the delicious flavors. This meal cost under $2 and provided protein, carbs, and vegetables in one satisfying bowl. This sweet, rich one-bowl meal transformed dried beans into a hearty, stick-to-your-ribs dinner. 1 pound of dried navy beans was soaked overnight in cold water, then drained and rinsed the next morning. The beans were placed in a heavy pot or Dutch oven with fresh water to cover by 2 inches, brought to a boil, then simmered for 1 hour until partially tender. The beans were drained, reserving 1 cup of the cooking liquid. The beans were returned to the pot along with the reserved liquid, 1 diced onion, 3 tablespoons of molasses, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of ketchup or tomato paste, 1 tablespoon of yellow mustard, 1 teaspoon of salt, black pepper, and 3 or 4 strips of salt pork or bacon cut into pieces. Everything was stirred together, covered, and baked in a 300 degrees Fahrenheit oven for 3 to 4 hours, stirring occasionally and adding water if the beans got too dry. The result was thick, sweet, savory baked beans with a rich, dark sauce. The beans were ladled into a bowl and eaten with a piece of cornbread or brown bread for dipping. The molasses gave the beans a deep caramelized sweetness, the salt pork added smoky richness, and the slow baking created a thick, syrupy sauce that coated every bean. This meal cost under $1 and provided protein, fiber, and iron, and it kept for over a week in the icebox, getting better with each reheating. This authentic Texas chili, no beans, just meat and spices, was a one-bowl meal that warmed seniors through cold winters. 1½ pounds of beef chuck was cut into half-inch cubes and seasoned generously with salt and black pepper. The beef was browned in batches in a heavy pot with 2 tablespoons of lard or bacon fat until deeply caramelized on all sides. 1 large diced onion and 4 minced garlic cloves were sautéed in the same pot until soft and fragrant. Then 3 tablespoons of chili powder, 1 tablespoon of ground cumin, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, or more for extra heat, and 2 tablespoons of flour were stirred in and cooked for 2 minutes until fragrant. 1 can of crushed tomatoes and 3 cups of beef broth were added, along with the browned beef cubes. The pot simmered on the lowest heat for 2 to 3 hours, stirred occasionally, until the beef was fork tender and the chili thickened into a rich, spicy sauce. The chili was ladled into a bowl and topped with diced raw onion, shredded cheddar cheese, and a dollop of sour cream if available. Eaten with saltine crackers or cornbread for dipping, this Texas bowl of red was intensely flavorful, beefy, spicy, and deeply satisfying. It cost under $3 and provided multiple servings of protein and bold flavor. Today, most chili recipes include beans, but the original Texas version was all about the meat and spices, and that authentic preparation has been largely forgotten. Beyond Texas Bowl of Red fed seniors through the 1950s and 60s on under $3 each. They combined pantry staples with simple techniques into satisfying meals. Today, they've been replaced by expensive canned and frozen versions that lack homemade richness. This quick, satisfying one-bowl meal became a staple for seniors living alone during the post-war years when canned goods were abundant and affordable, and the process was simple and took less than 20 minutes from start to finish. Seniors would open 1 can of corned beef hash, a mixture of finely chopped corned beef and diced potatoes pressed together, and empty it into a hot cast-iron skillet greased with 1 tablespoon of butter or bacon fat. The hash was pressed down into an even layer with a spatula and left undisturbed over medium-high heat for 8 to 10 minutes, and allowing the bottom to develop a deep golden brown crust that was crispy and caramelized. Using the spatula, the hash was flipped in sections and fried on the other side for another 5 to 7 minutes until equally crispy. Some seniors would dice a small onion and add it to the skillet to fry alongside the hash, adding sweetness and extra flavor. Once both sides were crispy, the hash was broken apart with the spatula and scooped into a bowl. Most seniors would crack 1 or 2 eggs into the same hot skillet and fry them sunny side up or over easy, then slide them on top of the hash in the bowl. The runny egg yolk mixed with the crispy, salty hash created a rich, satisfying combination. Sometimes a dash of hot sauce, a sprinkle of black pepper, or a dollop of ketchup was added on top. This meal cost less than $1. A can of corned beef hash was usually 50 cents or less, and it provided protein, carbs, and plenty of calories to fuel a senior through a long day of work or chores. The crispy exterior and soft interior of the hash, combined with the richness of the fried egg, made this a deeply comforting meal. It was especially popular on cold mornings or evenings when seniors didn't have the energy to cook something elaborate from scratch. The beauty of canned corned beef hash was its convenience. No chopping, no prep work, just open the can and fry. Today, corned beef hash is still available in cans, but younger generations rarely buy it or know how to cook it properly. They don't understand the technique of pressing it down and letting it develop that essential crispy crust, and they certainly don't appreciate the simple satisfaction of eating crispy hash, topped with a fried egg from a single bowl with a fork. This once common meal has faded from modern kitchens, replaced by expensive breakfast bowls at restaurants that cost 5 times as much and don't taste nearly as good as this humble, honest dish that kept seniors fed for pennies during the 1950s and 60s, when every dollar had to stretch as far as possible and waste was never an option. This iconic one-bowl meal was the ultimate comfort food for seniors living alone during the post-war era when Campbell's condensed soups became a household staple across America. The preparation was incredibly simple, requiring just 3 ingredients and less than 10 minutes of time. Seniors would open 1 can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup and empty it into a small pot. Following the instructions on the can, they'd add 1 can's worth of whole milk instead of water for extra creaminess and nutrition, and stir everything together over medium heat. The soup was heated slowly, stirred occasionally to prevent scorching on the bottom, until it was steaming hot and slightly bubbling around the edges, usually about 5 to 7 minutes. Once heated through, the tomato soup was ladled into a bowl, its bright orange-red color and smooth, creamy texture immediately comforting. Then came the essential step that younger generations don't understand. Seniors would take a handful of saltine crackers, crumble them between their palms directly over the bowl, and let the cracker crumbs fall into the hot soup. The crackers would float on top at first, then slowly soften and absorb the soup, creating a thick, porridge-like consistency that was easier to eat and more filling than plain soup alone. Some seniors would add a pat of butter on top of the hot soup, letting it melt and create a rich, glossy swirl. Others would sprinkle a bit of black pepper or add a dash of hot sauce for extra flavor. The tomato soup with crushed saltines was eaten slowly with a spoon, and the combination of sweet tangy tomato and soft salty crackers was pure nostalgia and comfort in every bite. This meal cost less than 50 cents total. A can of Campbell's tomato soup was typically 19 cents, and a sleeve of saltine crackers cost another 15 cents, was a daily comfort routine for millions of seniors. Today, people still eat Campbell's tomato soup, but they don't add the crushed saltines the way their grandparents did. They don't understand that the crackers weren't just a garnish. They were an essential part of the meal that transformed thin soup into a substantial, filling bowl that could serve as lunch or dinner. This simple technique has been forgotten, and with it, a piece of American food history has disappeared from everyday life. This sweet, creamy, one-bowl dessert as dinner was a comforting meal for seniors living alone, especially during the Depression and post-war years when ingredients were scarce and every grain of rice had to be used. Rice pudding was never thrown together quickly. It required patience and constant attention, but the result was a rich, custard-like pudding that could serve as both dessert and a complete meal. Seniors would start by cooking half a cup of long-grain white rice in 2 cups of water with a pinch of salt until the rice was tender and all the water was absorbed. Takes about 20 minutes. The cooked rice was then transferred to a heavy-bottomed pot, and 4 cups of whole milk were added along with half a cup of granulated sugar, 1 beaten egg, mixed with a bit of the warm milk first to prevent curdling, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a generous pinch of ground cinnamon or nutmeg. The mixture was cooked over the lowest possible heat, stirred constantly with a wooden spoon to prevent the rice from sticking to the bottom and the milk from scorching. This slow cooking process took 45 minutes to 1 hour, and during this time the milk gradually reduced and thickened, the egg created a custard-like texture, and the rice grains became soft and suspended in the creamy sauce. As the pudding cooked, seniors would add half a cup of raisins, which plumped up and added natural sweetness, and sometimes a tablespoon of butter for extra richness. The finished rice pudding was thick, creamy, and fragrant with vanilla and cinnamon. It was ladled into a bowl and eaten warm, though some seniors preferred it chilled in the icebox overnight. A sprinkle of extra cinnamon on top was the final touch. This rice pudding cost less than 75 cents to make and provided multiple servings. It was nourishing, full of calcium from the milk, carbs from the rice, and protein from the egg, and it was incredibly satisfying. Seniors often made a large pot on Sunday and ate it throughout the week, either as a sweet breakfast, an afternoon snack, or a light dinner when they didn't feel like cooking something savory. The slow stirring ritual was meditative and calming, and the result was a bowl of pure comfort that tasted like home and childhood memories. Today, people buy instant rice pudding cups or make quick microwave versions that lack the depth of flavor and creamy texture of this traditional stovetop version that required time, patience, and constant stirring to achieve perfection. This thrifty, satisfying one-bowl dessert as dinner transformed stale bread into a rich custardy meal that seniors living alone could make for pennies. Bread pudding was a brilliant way to use up day-old or slightly stale bread that was too hard to eat fresh but too good to throw away. During the Depression and post-war years, wasting food was unthinkable, and bread pudding was the ultimate solution. Seniors would tear 6 to 8 slices of stale bread, white, whole wheat or a mix, into 1-inch pieces and place them in a greased baking dish. In a separate bowl, they'd whisk together 3 eggs, 2 cups of whole milk, half a cup of granulated sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg until smooth and well combined. This custard mixture was poured over the torn bread pieces, and seniors would press the bread down gently with a spoon to make sure every piece was soaked through. The dish was left to sit for 15 minutes, allowing the bread to absorb the custard fully. Sometimes raisins, dried currants, or even diced apples were scattered throughout for extra flavor and texture. The bread pudding was baked in a 350 degrees Fahrenheit oven for 45 to 50 minutes until the top was golden brown and slightly crispy, the custard was set, and the pudding puffed up beautifully. When removed from the oven, the bread pudding was incredibly fragrant. The smell of vanilla, cinnamon, and caramelized sugar filled the kitchen. Seniors would scoop a generous portion into a bowl while it was still warm and eat it with a spoon. Some would drizzle a simple vanilla sauce on top, made by heating milk with sugar and vanilla, or add a dollop of whipped cream if they had it. The bread pudding was soft and custardy in the center, with a slightly crispy caramelized top layer that added textural contrast. It was sweet, rich, and incredibly satisfying, a complete meal that provided carbs, protein from the eggs and milk, and enough calories to serve as dinner. This bread pudding cost less than $1 to make and provided multiple servings that could be eaten warm or cold throughout the week. Today, people rarely make bread pudding at home, and when they do, they use fresh bread instead of stale, missing the authentic texture and resourcefulness of the original. This once common way of using leftovers has been forgotten in favor of throwing away stale bread and buying expensive desserts at the store. This gentle, comforting one-bowl meal was a staple for seniors living alone, especially when they were feeling unwell, had poor appetites, or simply wanted something soft and easy to digest. Milk toast might sound strange to modern ears, but during the Depression and post-war years, it was a common light meal that provided nutrition, a warmth and comfort in the simplest possible form. The preparation was incredibly easy and took less than 10 minutes. Seniors would toast 2 slices of white bread, or whole wheat if preferred, in a toaster or under the broiler until golden brown on both sides. While the bread was toasting, 1½ cups of whole milk were heated in a small pot over medium heat with 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and a pinch of salt, and stirred occasionally until the milk was steaming hot, but not boiling. Boiling would cause the milk to develop a skin and lose its smooth texture. Once the toast was ready, seniors would break it into large pieces or leave it whole and place it in a bowl. The hot sweetened milk was poured over the toast, completely covering the bread and allowing it to soak up the liquid. The toast would soften quickly, becoming tender and custard-like in texture. Some seniors would sprinkle a bit of ground cinnamon or nutmeg on top for extra flavor. The milk toast was eaten slowly with a spoon, and each bite was warm, sweet, and gentle on the stomach. The combination of soft, milk-soaked bread and sweet, buttery milk was incredibly soothing, almost like eating warm, liquid bread. This meal cost less than 25 cents and provided carbs, calcium, protein, and a sense of nurturing care. Milk toast was especially popular as a sickbed meal. When seniors had a cold, upset stomach or simply didn't feel like eating anything heavy, milk toast was the go-to choice because it was easy to prepare, gentle to eat, and provided quick energy. It was also a common bedtime snack because the warm milk had a calming effect that promoted sleep. Today, milk toast has completely disappeared from American kitchens. Younger generations have never heard of it, and the idea of pouring hot milk over toast sounds unappetizing to modern palates accustomed to bold flavors and complex dishes. But for seniors living alone in the 1950s and 60s, milk toast was a cherished comfort meal that represented simplicity, care, and the wisdom of making do with what you had on hand to create something nourishing and kind. These 5 one-bowl meals, corned beef hash, tomato soup with saltines, rice pudding, bread pudding, and sweet milk toast, sustained seniors through the 1950s and 60s for under $1 each. They used canned goods, leftovers, and pantry staples. Today, they've been forgotten, replaced by expensive convenience foods that lack homemade comfort and resourcefulness. This simple, sweet one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple that could serve as either a side dish or a complete light dinner for seniors living alone. Cream-style corn was different from whole kernel corn. The kernels were cut from the cob and scraped so thoroughly that the sweet corn milk was released, creating a thick, creamy texture naturally without adding any dairy. During corn season in late summer, seniors with gardens would make their own cream-style corn by shucking fresh ears, cutting the kernels off with a sharp knife, then scraping the cob with the back of the knife to extract every bit of the sweet liquid. The corn and its liquid were cooked slowly in a pot with 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 tablespoon of sugar to enhance the natural sweetness, a pinch of salt, and a few tablespoons of milk or cream if available. The mixture simmered over low heat for 15 to 20 minutes, stirred frequently until it thickened into a porridge-like consistency. Some seniors would add a tiny bit of flour or cornstarch mixed with water to thicken it even more. The finished cream-style corn was ladled into a bowl and eaten with a spoon while still hot. The butter melted into glossy pools on top, and the corn tasted sweet, rich, and almost dessert-like. For seniors living alone who had small appetites or were recovering from illness, a bowl of buttered cream-style corn provided carbs, natural sugars for energy, vitamins from the corn, and enough calories to serve as a light meal. This dish cost almost nothing if you grew your own corn, just the cost of butter and milk, and even canned cream-style corn was only 15 to 20 cents per can. During the winter months when fresh corn wasn't available, seniors would buy canned cream-style corn, heat it in a pot with butter and a pinch of sugar, and eat it the same way. The canned version wasn't quite as sweet or fresh-tasting as homemade, but it was still comforting and satisfying. Some seniors would crumble saltine crackers on top for added texture and saltiness, or mix in a beaten egg while the corn was cooking to create a thicker, more custard-like texture. Today, people rarely eat cream-style corn as a standalone meal. It's relegated to Thanksgiving side dish status or ignored entirely in favor of whole kernel corn. The art of making it from scratch, shucking fresh corn, cutting the kernels, scraping the cobs, and slowly simmering it into a creamy, sweet porridge has been completely lost. This rich, creamy one-bowl meal was a favorite way for seniors living alone to stretch leftover ham into multiple servings during the post-war years when nothing was wasted and every scrap of meat was precious. Scalloped potatoes required patience and careful layering, but the result was a dish so comforting and satisfying that it was worth the effort. Seniors would peel 4 large russet potatoes and slice them into thin rounds, about 1/8 inch thick. The thinner the slices, the better they'd cook and absorb the creamy sauce. Any leftover ham from Sunday dinner, usually the bone had already been used for soup, was diced into small cubes, about 1/2 cup total. A baking dish was greased with butter, and the potato slices were layered in the dish, slightly overlapping, with the diced ham scattered between each layer. After each layer of potatoes and ham, seniors would sprinkle a bit of flour, about 1 tablespoon per layer, dot with small pieces of butter, and season with salt, black pepper, and sometimes a pinch of paprika. This layering process was repeated until all the potatoes and ham were used, usually creating 3 to 4 layers. For the sauce, 2 cups of whole milk were heated in a pot with 2 tablespoons of butter until warm but not boiling. Sack then poured slowly over the layered potatoes until the liquid came about 3/4 of the way up the side of the dish. The potatoes would release starch as they cooked, thickening the milk into a creamy sauce. The dish was covered with aluminum foil and baked in a 375-degree Fahrenheit oven for 45 minutes. Then the foil was removed and it baked for another 30 minutes uncovered until the top layer of potatoes turned golden brown and slightly crispy, and the sauce was thick and bubbling. And the scalloped potatoes were removed from the oven and allowed to rest for 10 minutes so the sauce could set slightly. Then a generous portion was scooped into a bowl and eaten with a spoon and fork. The potatoes were tender and creamy, the ham added salty, savory bites throughout, and the sauce was rich and velvety from the starch released by the potatoes combined with the milk and butter. Some seniors would sprinkle shredded cheddar cheese between the layers for extra richness, or add a diced onion for more flavor. This meal cost under $2, less if using leftover ham, and provided multiple servings that could be reheated throughout the week. The scalloped potatoes tasted even better the next day after the flavors had melded together overnight. This hearty, savory one-bowl meal was a British-inspired dish that became popular in American kitchens during and after World War II, offering a practical way to stretch ground beef into a complete filling dinner. True cottage pie was made with beef, shepherd's pie used lamb, and it was essentially a meat pie without a pastry crust. The mashed potato topping served as the crust, making it more economical and just as satisfying. Seniors living alone would brown 1/2 pound of ground beef in a skillet, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon until fully cooked, then drain off most of the fat. 1 diced onion and 1 diced carrot were added to the beef and cooked until soft, about 7 minutes. 2 tablespoons of flour were sprinkled over the mixture and stirred to coat everything, creating a roux that would thicken the gravy. Then 1 cup of beef broth, or water with a beef bouillon cube, was slowly added while stirring, along with 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, 1/2 cup of frozen peas, salt, black pepper, and a pinch of dried thyme. The mixture simmered for 10 minutes until it thickened into a rich, savory gravy. Meanwhile, 3 large russet potatoes were peeled, cubed, and boiled in salted water until fork tender, about 20 minutes, then drained and mashed with 3 tablespoons of butter, half a cup of milk, salt and pepper until smooth and creamy. The beef mixture was spread evenly in a baking dish, and the mashed potatoes were spread on top, covering the meat completely. Some seniors would use a fork to create decorative ridges on the potato surface, which would brown beautifully in the oven. This unusual but practical one-bowl meal challenges modern assumptions about oatmeal being exclusively sweet. During the Depression and post-war years, seniors living alone often ate oatmeal as a savory dinner rather than a sweet breakfast, treating it more like polenta or grits, a blank canvas for butter, salt, and whatever else was available. The preparation was simple and took about 20 minutes. Seniors would bring 3 cups of water to a boil in a pot with a generous pinch of salt, then slowly stir in 1 cup of old-fashioned rolled oats. Not instant. Instant oats turned mushy and didn't have the right texture. The heat was reduced to low, and the oats simmered for 15 to 20 minutes, stirred occasionally until they absorbed all the water and became thick, creamy, and porridge-like. Once cooked, the oatmeal was ladled into a bowl while still steaming hot, and a generous pat of butter, at least 1 tablespoon, was placed on top and allowed to melt into a golden pool. The savory oatmeal was seasoned with more salt and cracked black pepper and eaten with a spoon while hot. The butter made it rich and satisfying, and the salt brought out the natural nutty flavor of the oats. Some seniors would stir in a beaten egg at the end of cooking to add protein and create a creamier texture, or top the oatmeal with a fried egg, crumbled bacon, or even a spoonful of leftover gravy. In some households, especially those with Eastern European heritage, savory oatmeal was served with sautéed onions or mushrooms stirred in, making it even more substantial and flavorful. This meal cost less than 20 cents and provided complex carbs, fiber, and enough calories to serve as a simple dinner. This Southern one-bowl meal was a staple for seniors living alone, especially in the South, where grits were as common as bread and just as essential to daily life. Grits are made from ground hominy corn, and they have a unique, slightly grainy texture and mild, corny flavor that becomes incredibly creamy when cooked properly. Seniors would bring 4 cups of water to a boil in a pot with a generous pinch of salt. Grits need plenty of salt to bring out their flavor. Then slowly whisk in 1 cup of white or yellow stone-ground grits. The heat was reduced to the lowest possible setting, and the grits simmered for 25 to 30 minutes, and stirred frequently with a wooden spoon to prevent them from sticking to the bottom and developing lumps. As the grits cooked, they absorbed the water and swelled, becoming thick, smooth, and creamy. The consistency should be like thick porridge, not runny or stiff. Once the grits reached the right texture, seniors would stir in 3 tablespoons of butter and 1 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, stirring constantly until both melted completely and the grits became glossy, rich, and incredibly creamy. The cheesy grits were ladled into a bowl while still hot, and sometimes topped with a fried egg, crumbled bacon, or a pat of additional butter for extra richness. The grits were eaten with a spoon, and each bite was smooth, buttery. These 5 one-bowl meals, buttered cream corn, scalloped potatoes with ham, English cottage pie, savory oatmeal, and cheesy grits, fed seniors through the 1950s and 60s for under $2 each. They used simple ingredients and patience. Today they've been forgotten, replaced by instant versions and expensive restaurant bowls that lack depth and authenticity. This rich, savory one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple that transformed simple ingredients into an elegant, satisfying dinner for seniors living alone. Welsh rarebit, often mispronounced as rabbit, was originally a British dish, but American seniors adapted it by adding beer for extra flavor and depth. The preparation was straightforward, but required attention to prevent the cheese from separating or becoming grainy. Seniors would melt 3 tablespoons of butter in a heavy saucepan over medium-low heat, then whisk in 3 tablespoons of flour to create a roux, cooking it for 2 minutes while stirring constantly until it turned golden and smelled nutty. Slowly, half a cup of beer, any inexpensive lager or ale worked fine, was whisked in, followed by half a cup of whole milk, to creating a smooth, thick sauce. The heat was kept low to prevent scorching. Then 2 cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese were added gradually, 1 handful at a time, stirring constantly until each addition melted completely before adding more. This slow process ensured the cheese melted smoothly without separating into an oily mess. Once all the cheese was melted and the sauce was smooth and glossy, seniors would season it with 1 teaspoon of dry mustard powder, which enhanced the cheese flavor, a pinch of cayenne pepper for a subtle kick, salt, and black pepper. Meanwhile, 2 or 3 slices of bread were toasted until golden brown and cut into triangles or cubes. The toast pieces were placed in a bowl, and the hot beer cheese sauce was ladled generously over the top, completely covering the bread. Some seniors would add a poached or fried egg on top for extra protein, or sprinkle a bit of paprika over the sauce for color. The rarebit was eaten immediately with a fork and spoon, while the cheese sauce was still hot and the toast was slightly crispy underneath, but soft where it had absorbed the sauce. The combination of sharp cheddar, nutty beer flavor, and crispy soft toast was incredibly satisfying and rich. This meal cost under $1.50 and provided protein from the cheese and eggs, carbs from the bread, and calcium. It was considered a special occasion meal, something seniors made when they wanted to treat themselves or when they had company. The beer cheese rarebit felt elegant and sophisticated despite its simple ingredients. Today, this dish has almost completely disappeared from American tables. Younger generations have never heard of Welsh rarebit, and the technique of making a proper cheese sauce from scratch with beer has been lost to jarred cheese sauces and fondue pots. This vibrant, flavorful one-bowl meal brought the tastes of Italy to American seniors' tables for under $1 during the post-war years when Italian cuisine was becoming increasingly popular across the country. Known as eggs in purgatory or shakshuka in other cultures, this dish was a brilliant way to combine protein-rich eggs with nutrient-dense tomatoes into a complete, satisfying meal. The seniors living alone would start by heating 2 tablespoons of olive oil, or butter if olive oil wasn't available, in a large skillet over medium heat. 1 diced onion and 3 minced garlic cloves were sautéed until soft and fragrant about 5 minutes. Then 1 large can of crushed tomatoes was added along with 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1 teaspoon of dried basil, a pinch of red pepper flakes for heat, salt, and black pepper. The tomato sauce simmered for 15 to 20 minutes. I stirred occasionally until it thickened slightly, and the flavors melded together into a rich, aromatic sauce. Once the sauce was ready, seniors would use the back of a spoon to create 3 or 4 shallow wells in the tomato mixture, spacing them evenly around the skillet. 1 egg was carefully cracked into each well, making sure the yolk stayed intact. The skillet was covered with a lid, and the eggs cooked for 6 to 8 minutes until the whites were set, but the yolks were still runny. This timing was crucial because overcooked eggs with hard yolks weren't nearly as satisfying. Some seniors preferred their yolks fully cooked and would leave the lid on for a few more minutes. Once the eggs were cooked to preference, the entire contents of the skillet, tomato sauce and eggs together, were carefully transferred to a bowl, making sure not to break the yolks. 2 or 3 slices of crusty Italian bread were toasted and placed alongside or torn into pieces and used for dipping into the sauce and runny yolks. The eggs in tomato sauce were eaten with a spoon and fork, breaking into the yolks so they mixed with the tomato sauce and created a rich, creamy texture. The combination of sweet, savory tomatoes, aromatic herbs, runny egg yolks, and crusty bread was incredibly satisfying. This meal provided protein from the eggs, vitamins from the tomatoes, and carbs from the bread, all for under $1. It was quick to make, used simple pantry staples, and felt special and flavorful despite its humble ingredients. Today, this dish has been rediscovered in trendy brunch restaurants where it's called shakshuka and costs $12 to $15 per serving, 10 times what it cost seniors to make at home. The modern versions often add feta cheese, fresh herbs. This resourceful one-bowl meal transformed a single can of salmon into a complete, protein-rich dinner for seniors living alone during the post-war years when canned fish was affordable and widely available. Salmon cakes, also called salmon patties or croquettes, were a southern and mid-Atlantic staple that stretched expensive fresh fish into multiple servings using breadcrumbs and eggs as binders. Seniors would open one 14-ounce can of pink salmon, drain the liquid, and empty the contents into a mixing bowl. Using a fork, they'd flake the salmon apart, removing any large bones and skin, though many seniors left the tiny soft bones in because they were edible and provided extra calcium. To the flaked salmon, they'd add 1 beaten egg, half a cup of breadcrumbs or crushed saltine crackers, 1 tablespoon of finely diced onion, 1 tablespoon of mayonnaise, 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, salt, and black pepper. And everything was mixed together gently with a fork until just combined. Overmixing made the patties dense and tough. The mixture was shaped into 4 round patties about ½ an inch thick. 2 tablespoons of butter or vegetable oil were heated in a cast-iron skillet over medium heat, and the salmon patties were carefully placed in the hot fat and fried for 4 to 5 minutes per side until golden brown and crispy on the outside. The cooked salmon cakes were removed and set aside briefly. For the complete bowl meal, seniors would prepare 2 simple accompaniments: 1 cup of white rice cooked in 2 cups of water until fluffy, and 1 cup of frozen peas simmered in a simple white sauce made from 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour, and 1 cup of milk, seasoned with salt and pepper. The rice was scooped into a bowl, 1 or 2 salmon cakes were placed on top, and the creamed peas were ladled over everything. The salmon cake bowl was eaten with a fork, and each bite combined the crispy, savory salmon cake with fluffy rice and creamy sweet peas. Sometimes seniors would add a squeeze of lemon juice on top, or a dollop of tartar sauce if they had it. This meal cost under $1.50 and provided high-quality protein from the salmon, carbs from the rice, and vitamins from the peas. Canned salmon was considered a pantry staple. Every senior kept several cans on hand for quick meals. The salmon cakes could be made ahead, refrigerated, and reheated, making them practical for weekly meal planning. Today, canned salmon sits largely ignored in grocery stores while people buy expensive fresh salmon fillets. The art of making crispy salmon cakes from canned fish has been forgotten, and younger generations don't understand the resourcefulness and skill required to transform a humble can of salmon into a complete, satisfying meal that tasted special enough for Sunday dinner, but economical enough for everyday eating during the 1950s and 60s when every dollar mattered. This simple yet satisfying one-bowl meal was the ultimate example of how seniors living alone could transform a single ingredient during the post-war years when potatoes were one of the cheapest foods available. The beauty of a loaded baked potato was its versatility and the fact that it could be as plain or as elaborate as your pantry allowed. Seniors would select one large russet potato, the bigger the better for maximum filling power, scrub it clean under running water, dry it thoroughly, and pierce it several times with a fork to allow steam to escape during baking. The potato was rubbed all over with a bit of butter or vegetable oil and sprinkled with coarse salt, which would create a crispy, flavorful skin. It was placed directly on the oven rack and baked at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour to 1 hour and 15 minutes, depending on size, until the skin was crispy and the inside was fluffy and tender when squeezed gently. While the potato baked, seniors would prepare the toppings, and this was where creativity and resourcefulness came into play. The classic combination included 2 tablespoons of butter, a 1/4 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, 2 tablespoons of sour cream, and 2 strips of crumbled crispy bacon, 1 tablespoon of chopped green onions, if available, salt, and black pepper. Once the potato was baked and still piping hot, seniors would cut a deep cross in the top, squeeze the ends gently to open it up, and fluff the inside with a fork, then load it with toppings in layers. Butter first, so it melted into the hot potato flesh, then cheese, so it melted into gooey strings, then sour cream, bacon bits, green onions, and finally salt and pepper. The entire loaded baked potato was placed in a bowl and eaten with a fork and spoon, making sure to get some crispy skin with every bite. The combination of fluffy potato, melted butter and cheese, tangy sour cream, smoky bacon, and crispy skin was incredibly satisfying. For seniors on tighter budgets, the toppings could be simplified to just butter and salt, or butter and cheese, or even cottage cheese and chives. Some seniors would top their baked potato with leftover chili, making it even more substantial, or with creamed tuna, transforming it into a complete protein-rich meal. This loaded baked potato cost anywhere from 25 cents to $1 depending on the toppings used, and it provided carbs, protein, calcium, and enough calories to serve as a filling dinner. Today, baked potatoes are served as side dishes at steakhouses or as fast food options. But the tradition of making a single baked potato into a complete one-bowl dinner has faded from home kitchens, and younger generations don't appreciate the humble satisfaction of eating a well-made loaded baked potato. This old-fashioned one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple that transformed cornmeal into a hearty, sweet-savory dinner for seniors living alone when money was scarce and creativity was essential. The cornmeal mush, also called cornmeal porridge or polenta in Italian cuisine, was cooked, chilled until firm, sliced, and fried until crispy, a brilliant technique that created 2 completely different textures from the same simple ingredient. Seniors would bring 4 cups of water to a boil in a pot with a generous pinch of salt, then slowly whisk in 1 cup of yellow cornmeal in a thin, steady stream while stirring constantly to prevent lumps from forming. The heat was reduced to low, and the cornmeal mixture simmered for 25 to 30 minutes, stirred frequently, until it became very thick and pulled away from the sides of the pot. The consistency should be like thick porridge. Once cooked, the hot cornmeal mush was poured into a greased loaf pan, smoothed on top, and refrigerated for at least 4 hours or overnight until it was completely cold and firm enough to slice. When ready to eat, the firm cornmeal mush was turned out of the pan onto a cutting board and sliced into half-inch thick rectangles, like slices of bread. 2 to 3 tablespoons of butter or bacon fat were heated in a cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat until sizzling, and the cornmeal slices were carefully placed in the hot fat and fried for 4 to 5 minutes per side until deeply golden brown and crispy on the outside, while remaining soft and creamy on the inside. The fried mush slices were transferred to a bowl and drizzled generously with real maple syrup, or cane syrup or sorghum molasses if maple syrup was too expensive. Some seniors would also top the fried mush with a pat of butter, a sprinkle of cinnamon sugar, or even crumbled bacon for a sweet and savory combination. The fried mush was eaten with a fork and knife, cutting through the crispy exterior to reveal the soft, warm interior, with each bite soaked in sweet syrup. The contrast between the crispy outside and creamy inside, combined with the sweet maple syrup, made this a surprisingly satisfying meal. Fried cornmeal mush cost less than 30 cents to make and provided complex carbs and quick energy. It was often served for breakfast, but was just as commonly eaten for dinner, especially during hard times when money was tight, and cornmeal was one of the cheapest staples available. The process of cooking the mush, chilling it, slicing it, and frying it required planning ahead, which meant seniors needed to think about their meals a day in advance, a practice that's been lost in today's culture of instant gratification and last-minute meal decisions. Today, fried cornmeal mush has virtually disappeared from American tables, except in a few rural areas. These 5 one-bowl meals: beer cheese rarebit, eggs in tomato sauce, salmon cake bowl, loaded baked potato, and fried mush with syrup, fed seniors through the 1950s and 60s for under $2 each. They combined simple ingredients with smart techniques. This gentle, comforting one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple for seniors living alone, especially those with small appetites, digestive issues, or simply a desire for something soft and easy to eat. The British-inspired name soldiers referred to strips of buttered toast that stood upright in the bowl like little soldiers, perfect for dipping into the soft scrambled eggs. The key to this dish was the scrambling technique. Not the fast, high-heat method that produces dry, rubbery curds, but the slow, gentle method that creates creamy, custard-like eggs. Seniors would crack 3 large eggs into a bowl, add 2 tablespoons of whole milk or cream, a pinch of salt, and a small pinch of white pepper, which was milder and more elegant than black pepper. Then whisk everything together until smooth and well combined. A heavy-bottomed saucepan was placed over the lowest possible heat, and 1 tablespoon of butter was added and allowed to melt slowly. The egg mixture was poured into the warm pan, and using a wooden spoon or silicone spatula, the eggs were stirred very slowly and gently, scraping the bottom and sides of the pan constantly. This slow cooking process took 10 to 12 minutes, much longer than most people have patience for today, but the result was eggs that were soft, creamy, and almost pudding-like in texture, with tiny, delicate curds rather than large, dry chunks. The eggs should never be fully set. They should still look slightly wet and glossy when removed from the heat, because they'd continue cooking from residual heat. While the eggs cooked, 2 or 3 slices of white bread were toasted until golden brown, and then buttered generously while still hot and cut into long strips about 1 inch wide. These were the soldiers. The soft scrambled eggs were ladled into a bowl, and the buttered toast soldiers were arranged around the edge, standing upright. The meal was eaten by dipping the toast soldiers into the creamy eggs, letting each piece soak up the rich, velvety texture before taking a bite. The combination of soft, buttery eggs and crispy, buttery toast was incredibly comforting and gentle on the stomach. Some seniors would sprinkle fresh chopped chives or a tiny bit of grated cheese on top of the eggs for extra flavor. This meal cost less than 50 cents and provided high-quality protein, fats, and carbs in a form that was easy to digest and incredibly soothing. Soft scrambled eggs with toast soldiers were especially popular as a light dinner, a sick-bed meal, or a comforting supper before bed. Today, most people make scrambled eggs quickly over high heat, resulting in dry, overcooked eggs that bear no resemblance to the creamy, luxurious texture of properly made soft scramble. The patience and technique required to make truly soft scrambled eggs have been lost, and the charming tradition of cutting toast This vibrant, flavorful one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple that combined fresh tomatoes with scrambled eggs into a simple yet satisfying dinner for seniors living alone. The dish was especially popular during late summer, when tomatoes were abundant, cheap, and at their peak flavor, allowing seniors to use garden-fresh produce or purchase seconds from the market for pennies. The preparation was straightforward and took less than 15 minutes from start to finish. Seniors would dice one large ripe tomato, or two medium tomatoes, into small chunks, removing the core and any tough parts, but leaving the seeds and juice, because they added flavor and moisture. 1 tablespoon of butter was heated in a cast-iron skillet over medium heat until melted and sizzling. Then the diced tomatoes were added and cooked for 3 to 4 minutes, stirring occasionally until they softened and released their juices, creating a light sauce in the pan. While the tomatoes cooked, 3 large eggs were cracked into a bowl, mixed with 2 tablespoons of milk, salt, and black pepper, and beaten together until smooth. The egg mixture was poured into the skillet over the cooked tomatoes, and using a spatula, everything was gently scrambled together over medium-low heat, and stirring slowly and folding the eggs and tomatoes together until the eggs were just set, but still soft and slightly creamy, about 2 to 3 minutes. The eggs should not be overcooked or dry. They should be tender and moist, with chunks of tomato throughout. Some seniors would add a pinch of dried oregano or basil to the eggs for extra flavor, or stir in a handful of fresh chopped parsley at the end. Once the scramble was cooked, it was immediately scooped into a bowl and eaten with a fork. 2 slices of toast were buttered and cut into triangles, then placed alongside the bowl or torn into pieces and mixed directly into the scramble. The combination of creamy scrambled eggs, sweet tangy tomatoes, and buttery toast was simple yet deeply satisfying. Today, people rarely combine tomatoes and scrambled eggs in this simple way, instead opting for more elaborate breakfast scrambles with multiple ingredients. The beauty of the original tomato and egg scramble was its simplicity: just eggs, tomatoes, butter, and toast, allowing the natural flavors to shine without any fuss or complication. This once common meal has faded from everyday cooking, and younger generations have never experienced the pleasure of eating a bowl of soft scrambled eggs studded with sweet, ripe tomatoes during peak tomato season. This refreshing, light one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple for seniors living alone, especially during hot summer months when heavy cooked meals felt too burdensome and appetites were smaller. The combination of cold, young creamy cottage cheese with sweet canned fruit was considered both nutritious and elegant, and it was often served as a ladies' luncheon dish or a light supper. Seniors would scoop 1 cup of cottage cheese, the large curd variety was preferred for its texture, into a bowl, then open a can of cling peaches, pear halves, or fruit cocktail, drain the syrup, and arrange the fruit pieces on top of the cottage cheese. Sometimes fresh fruit was used when in season: sliced strawberries, blueberries, or cantaloupe cubes, but canned fruit was more common because it was available year-round and kept indefinitely in the pantry. The sweet cottage cheese bowl could be eaten exactly as prepared, or seniors would add a few optional enhancements: a drizzle of honey over the top, a sprinkle of ground cinnamon or nutmeg, a handful of chopped walnuts or pecans for crunch, or even a few saltine crackers crumbled on top for a sweet-salty contrast. The cottage cheese provided protein and calcium, the fruit provided vitamins and natural sugars for energy, and the whole meal felt light and refreshing without being unsatisfying. This sweet cottage cheese bowl cost under 75 cents and required absolutely no cooking, making it ideal for seniors who didn't want to heat up the kitchen during summer or who didn't have the energy to cook a full meal. The simple pleasure of eating a bowl of cold cottage cheese topped with sweet canned peaches on a hot summer evening has been lost, and with it, a piece of practical, resourceful eating that sustained seniors through the 1950s and 60s when simplicity and economy were valued over complexity and expense. This hearty, economical one-bowl meal transformed ground beef into an elegant dinner that felt special enough for Sunday supper, but cheap enough for everyday eating during the post-war years when seniors living alone wanted something more substantial than soup or sandwiches. Hamburger steak, also called Salisbury steak, was essentially a large, oval-shaped hamburger patty served with rich brown gravy and mashed potatoes, all eaten from a single bowl with a fork and spoon. Seniors would mix half a pound of ground beef with one beaten egg, a quarter cup of breadcrumbs or crushed saltine crackers, 2 tablespoons of finely diced onion, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, salt and black pepper in a bowl, using their hands to combine everything gently without overmixing. The mixture was shaped into one large oval patty about 1 inch thick. 1 tablespoon of butter or bacon fat was heated in a cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat, and the hamburger steak was placed in the hot fat and cooked for 5 to 6 minutes per side until browned and cooked through. The cooked steak was removed and set aside on a plate. In the same skillet, keeping all the browned bits and drippings, 1 tablespoon of flour was sprinkled and stirred to make a roux, cooking for 1 minute until it smelled toasty. Then 1½ cups of beef broth, or water with a beef bouillon cube, was slowly added while stirring constantly, scraping up all the flavorful browned bits from the bottom of the pan. The gravy simmered for 5 minutes until thickened, then was seasoned with salt, black pepper, and sometimes a dash of kitchen bouquet or soy sauce to deepen the color and add extra umami flavor. Meanwhile, 2 large russet potatoes were peeled, cubed, boiled until tender, then mashed with butter, milk, salt, and pepper until smooth and creamy. The mashed potatoes were scooped into a bowl, and the hamburger steak was placed on top, and the rich brown gravy was ladled generously over everything, covering both the meat and the potatoes. It felt like a restaurant-quality meal, but was made entirely at home with simple ingredients. This practical, a comforting one-bowl meal was a Depression and post-war staple that delivered all the satisfaction of traditional chicken pot pie without the time and expense of making pastry crust. For seniors living alone, the crust was often seen as unnecessary bulk. What they really wanted was the rich, creamy filling packed with chicken and vegetables, all eaten from a bowl with a spoon. Seniors would start by cooking 1 or 2 chicken thighs, bone-in for flavor, in a pot with 4 cups of water, 1 quartered onion, 1 bay leaf, salt and pepper for 45 minutes to 1 hour until the chicken was tender and falling off the bone. The broth was strained and reserved. In a large pot, 3 tablespoons of butter were melted over medium heat. Then 3 tablespoons of flour were whisked in to create a roux, cooking for 2 minutes until golden and nutty smelling. 2 cups of the reserved chicken broth were slowly added while whisking constantly, followed by 1 cup of whole milk, creating a thick, creamy white sauce. The shredded chicken was added back to the pot, along with 1 diced carrot, 1 diced celery stalk, 1 diced potato, all pre-cooked or parboiled for 5 minutes so they'd be tender. Pot pie filling was seasoned with salt, black pepper, a pinch of dried thyme, and a pinch of poultry seasoning. The finished crustless pot pie was ladled into a bowl while steaming hot, and some seniors would place a buttered biscuit on top. These 61-bowl dinners weren't just meals. They were survival, resourcefulness, and love cooked into every spoonful. Seniors living alone during the Depression and post-war years didn't have grocery budgets, meal kits, or takeout apps. Today, we've traded those skills for convenience, frozen dinners, instant meals, expensive takeout that costs 10 times what our grandparents spent and delivers half the satisfaction.